Can everyone also see me okay? Hi, hi. Good. Yeah, I'm the character in the moving character in the video, not the character in the picture here, even though my name is under it. So today we're going to look at, the title is Critical Thinking at All Levels, Tapping into Curiosity. And what I'm aiming to do is to show how critical thinking is applicable at all levels. And what I mean is all stages of learning and all aspects of learning. That is to say, all levels from A1 to C1, all ages from younger learners through to adults, and all aspects of learning, that's to say all four skills, and also to grammar and vocabulary. And I'm hoping to do that in the next 50 minutes, which is quite ambitious, but let's give it a go and see how we go. What I'd like to ask you first is simply to know, I'd like to find out from you what age groups you teach. Could you just type into the box whether you focus more on primary learners or secondary learners, or perhaps you're teaching adults and young adults, or maybe it's a mixture of all three, I don't know. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got. Okay, so quite a lot of secondary now, tertiary, older ones, good. Okay, some primaries too, which is great, because we'll be looking at quite a lot of that sort of material. Mixtures from 12 to 19, fantastic. Primaries, 6 to 10, very young there. Okay, fantastic, it's good. Well, I hope there's something for everyone here in this talk, because I say it's about tapping into critical curiosity and critical thinking at all stages of learning and all ages. And the first thing I'd like you to do, I'd just like you to look at three quotes, three things that people said. And I want you to tell me, first of all, who do you think said these things? Who do you think said these things? You can pop your answer in the box again, if you like. Good, yeah. I think most people are getting the idea. Yeah. These are things typically said by children. Okay, and my next question for you is, what do you think they have in common? What do these questions have in common and comments have in common? Again, you can type in the box and tell me what you think. Curiosity, people are saying, great. Innocence, ironic, good, good. Fantastic. They're all questions, of course. Yeah, a sense of justice. Good. That's nice. I like that. Good. And logic. Fantastic. You've picked up on the three things here, which is perfect. Let's just have a look at them. This question, how can birds hear when they don't have ears? It's the kind of question that kids normally ask. It's a question about being, it's a question that comes from being curious. The second one, why is it called a walking stick when it can't walk? Well, that's kind of kids' logic, isn't it? It's a sort of thing, the sort of logical thing they sort of follow through in a sort of funny child's logic way. And the last one, why do I have to tidy the bedroom myself? It's Luke's room as well. Comes from that kid's sense of fairness, really, or particularly that kid's sense of what is unfair. And what's interesting here is that these three things kind of encapsulate, as we're going to see in a moment, what critical thinking is. And my contention is that kids are really natural critical thinkers, but somehow during the education process, or during the education journey, they seem to somehow lose some of these aspects of curiosity and logic and so on. We almost seem to educate them out of it, and when they get back to sort of late secondary or university stage, we find that we have to teach them these critical thinking skills again. So there's some sort of danger in that middle stage of learning, with all the pressure of testing and exams and so on, somehow that the magic of learning will kind of disappear. and that students will kind of lose that focus of what the real purpose of learning is, which I guess I hope we all believe, is to learn how to learn, rather than just to keep acquiring knowledge and knowledge and knowledge. So the danger is, I guess, that if they fall out of love with learning, then they lose that curiosity, and it's that curiosity which kind of devours knowledge. I've been working on a book with my colleague John Hughes, that you probably know also, and we've been working on a book about critical thinking. And in our definition of critical thinking, we looked at, or trying to come to a definition of critical thinking, we looked at lots of different definitions by different people, and we found that 3 themes kept recurring. And these were the 3 themes that we kept finding. That first of all, critical thinking is about reflective thinking. What's reflective thinking? It's really just the habit of questioning things. If you don't question the thing before you, if you simply accept what's fed to you, what's given to you, or the information that is before you as true, then what you actually have is uncritical thinking. So that's the first thing. And that corresponds to this idea of being curious. It's questioning what's before you. The second is rational or reasoned thinking. And that is an aspect of critical thinking that's very commonly emphasized at tertiary level, at university level. It's what we emphasize when we ask students to research an academic essay, for example. We ask them to be objective and rational. And so that is really encapsulated by this idea of being logical. The third thing is a sort of element of reasonableness, if you like, what we've called reasonable thinking. Why reasonable thinking? Well, the idea of questioning something and then following it through in a logical way is all very well if the facts are available to you. But as we all know, sometimes not all the facts are available to us, or not available to us at a given time. And in those cases, what we have to do is make a kind of reasonable judgment. Either we kind of reserve judgment, we say, no, we can't make a judgment about this, or we try and come to a kind of reasonable conclusion that is as free from bias or prejudice as is possible. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how we can kind of maintain that idea of, let's just put this one in, sorry, it's the last one, that was that sense of fairness, sorry, that we talked about children having naturally. And what I want to look at now is some activities that can try and maintain that sense of curiosity and that sense of fairness through learning, through the learning process, to keep that idea or to keep that critical thinking mindset alive in our students, because critical thinking is a mindset, it's an approach to the way that we learn everything. So, here's just another sentence. Could you just tell me who you think said this? You can just type in the box. Teachers say it, absolutely. Yeah. Such silly teachers, a lazy teacher. Okay. Fine. Yeah. Okay. It's something actually that I've heard quite a lot as I've been around, as I go around the world, sort of talking about critical thinking often. I hear this kind of complaint from teachers, particularly secondary teachers, secondary school teachers, or sort of higher, upper secondary school teachers, that their students don't really do critical thinking. And it's something I started to reflect on. Why is that? Why don't they do critical thinking? Because it's a skill which is actually innate in all of us. It's something we all can do. It's not about being smart, particularly. It's not about having naturally super sort of sharp analytical skills. It's just a kind of habit, as we looked at in the last slide. It's the habit of questioning and then following through that questioning in a rational way to come to a reasonable conclusion. So perhaps in some cases the exam doesn't ask them to do that, but actually eventually somebody's going to ask them to do that. Certainly employers are going to ask students to do that. Problem-solving skills are very highly prized skills in business now. And does anybody know who said this? You may have seen it actually in the blurb for this particular talk. Any idea? Yeah, it was Einstein, exactly, yeah. And he was emphasizing this very point, that it's not about being particularly clever or particularly gifted, or as I say, having particularly strong analytical skills. It's just about wanting to know. It's about wanting to find out more. Okay. Good. There's one thing before we get on to the activities that I should mention. And is everybody familiar with this phrase, the elephant in the room? It's the idea that there's a subject, there's an issue that people don't really want to talk about, even though it's very present, and it may be a block to the progress that we're trying to make. No one is actually talking about it. Good, as someone has just pointed out in the box. Exactly. So we say our aim is to stimulate curiosity and to get learners to question things in the context of what they already know. Perhaps we run up against an issue, and the issue is the elephant in the room, is that perhaps the students lack a kind of subject knowledge. So I think this is an often overlooked fact about critical thinking, that background knowledge informs critical thinking at multiple levels. That's to say, if you're asking your students to evaluate ideas or to compare ideas to something, if they've got nothing to compare them to, if they don't really have very much background knowledge, they're going to find that difficult. So in other words, what I'm saying, it's all very well questioning things, but you have to build up some sort of background knowledge in some sort of context in which to question those things for that to be effective, if you like. So the first activity I'd like to look at is ways of, or first two activities, are ways of promoting that kind of subject knowledge. So let's just have a look. This is the first one, and this is something you could apply actually to any particular topic. So think of any topic that you have at the beginning of a lesson. It might be travel, it might be transport, it might be health. In this case, the topic of this particular lesson is the global population, as illustrated by this picture here. And what you ask your students to do, and what I'm going to ask you to do now, is to write down three things. And the first thing I want you to write down is one thing you know for sure about the topic of global population. Okay, could everybody do that now? Could you just type in the box and say one thing that you know for sure about the topic of global population? Good, someone has put there's at least 7 billion people on the planet, that it's growing. Fantastic. Okay, good, that it's increasing. That seems to be a fairly well shared piece of knowledge. Good, good, good. Okay, and now the next thing I'd like you to write is one thing that you think might be true about the global population, but perhaps you want to check it. You're not entirely sure of it. So it's something perhaps you'll go and look on the internet and check, or you'll ask someone who you think is more knowledgeable about the subject. So can you write that now? One thing you think is true, but want to check. Okay. So more than half of it is in poor countries. It tends to grow faster in poor countries. That's good. Okay. Migration, sorry, this is going quite fast, but Okay, it's a problem of family planning. The food supply, is the food supply sufficient for the growing population? Okay, good. And the last thing, what's one thing that you think people say is true, or that you hear quite commonly, but probably isn't true? What do people commonly say about the global population that you hear, that you think probably isn't true? Could you write that? That population kind of causes poverty itself, that the two things are sort of inseparable, that we'll run out of food, good. That people feel more alienated, that's interesting. Yes, that it'll end in wars and fighting, that people are going to kill each other, good. Okay, fantastic. So that's just an activity you can do, and what you can do with students is direct them in the way of research. They can look on the internet, they can ask each other, as I say, and you can open up this discussion. So it's all about building background knowledge to a topic before you then enter into it with a text, as is the case with this lesson here. So there's then a text about 7 billion people and where the population is going and what's going to happen about it. Good. So you could do that with any topic. Let's have a look at another activity. So this is from a low-level, primary level book, and is quite a low level. Sorry, I should have said to you, every activity that I'm going to show you, this was true of the last slide, you will see in the corner I've put here what the level is. So this one's just A2 plus, and what the age group is. So the last one actually was actually the activity we looked at before was applicable, in fact, to any age group or any level. It could have worked with any age group or level, that idea of researching more information. So this one is about taking kids on a virtual school trip. So it's like a school project, just as you do with young kids, and they may visit a local farm or something like that, or go to a local museum or some such thing. In the book, look, in this new series that we've developed, one of the things that the kids do is this is to promote the idea of research and them doing their own research. We help them a little bit with that research by taking them on a kind of virtual visit by use of video to a particular place. And in this case, the place is Antarctica. And what we're going to do is we're just going to look at an extract of this video, and I want you to tell me, I just want you to watch it and tell me what you think the topic of this video is. What are the students, what kind of project do you think is going to come out of this? What are they actually looking at it for? Okay, let's have a look now. I think Emily's going to play it. Good.
Penguins live in very cold waters in the Antarctic Ocean. They eat fish, and there are a lot of fish. What are these penguins doing? They're looking for food. They're swimming and catching fish. But what do the fish eat?
Okay, good. So sorry, that's a little bit jerky. I think you've got the general idea, and somebody's put it now in the box. It's about the food chain and the importance of the food chain. Exactly. So we take the kids on this virtual trip, and from that they then do their own research on a food chain involving another animal, an animal of their own choice, and they do the research and they pick up what things it feeds on and what feeds on them, and then they produce a kind of poster showing the food chain, and they present it to the rest of the class. So these are things like the activity before that I said that kind of build background knowledge. One of the key sort of elements, I think, really, or this kind of elephant in the room, as I've said, that informs critical thinking and good critical thinkers. Okay, let's just have a look at two other sentences that people commonly say. These are things, I don't know if this is these are statements that you've heard yourself. Again, it's something I hear from teachers quite often, that their students don't read books, their students just want to look at their phones all the time. How do we change that? Do we try to change it? That's the question. I think the first thing to recognize about this kind of problem is that it's not so much what people are looking at and listening to and reading, it's really how they're looking and listening and reading. And I think what we have to recognize now is that people are receiving information through many, many different media. And the media through which they're acquiring knowledge needs to be addressed. We need to talk about it. We need to create exercises using it and train them to think critically about how to interpret information through these media. What I'm talking about really is what's commonly known now as 21st century literacies, things like digital literacy, media literacy, how the media presents information through visual and text images, cultural literacy, visual literacy, I think I mentioned already. We're going to look at a couple of those in a moment. The second thing is how we can engage learners more actively in reading texts, so that they're thinking more deeply about what's really going on in the text, that they get more engaged with it and therefore get more out of it. Let's just look at the first issue and the question of 21st century literacy. So this is an activity, it's outside a book, but it's about digital literacy. And it's really reflecting the fact that a lot of us now, when we're looking for an opinion or for advice, increasingly we're not seeking expert opinions, but we're seeking the opinions of ordinary people. This is happening in politics, it's happening in other spheres of life. So here's an example. This is something that I wanted to buy. Does anybody know what this object is in the picture, this green circular thing? Has anyone got an idea what it is? No. Okay, good. Someone's got it. It's a green screen, yeah. Good. It's a green screen, and what you do is you stick it to the back of your chair, like this, and then if you're using a platform like this one, like Adobe Connect or with Zoom or something to do online teaching or something, you can actually choose an option where you project an image behind you. So I could be standing in front of the Taj Mahal, for example, or standing in a jungle in Sri Lanka, somewhere like that. And so represent myself in a kind of sort of virtual reality way. So I wanted to buy one of these because I do a lot of online teaching. And I went online, and this is the only one really that attaches to a chair. And so before I bought it, of course, what I did was to look at the price, and then to look at the reviews. Okay? And what I want to ask you now, what I'd like to ask you about this is this following question. So you can see there are a range of reviews ranging from 5 stars down to 1 star. And what I want to know is which of these reviews, imagine it was you that was going to buy this piece of equipment to do online teaching, which of these reviews would you look at first? Okay, someone says the worst, someone says the best. 5 star and 1 star, we've got both ends of the spectrum. Okay, someone says 4, 3. Okay, good. Okay, so we can have a discussion about that. Why is it that you would look at the 5-star ones? Why have people chosen that one? Why have people said they'd look at the best review first of all? To see the advantages of it? Fine. Good. And why would you look at the worst? I'm imagining you're going to say the opposite, to see the worst of it. My actual belief with these things is that, so that's a discussion you can have with your students. You can then look at the reviews and they can try and interpret them critically and see if they, to what extent they believe the person and why they think a particular review is more believable than another review. I don't know, what I tend to do with these things is look at the 3 stars because I think you tend to get the most balanced view. That's my idea. I always go for the middle one. The 1 stars I think are probably people who've always complaining about something. That's just my idea, but maybe it isn't true. But anyway, this then, as I say, progresses into a lesson where you look at reviews, and you can do this with anything, and emphasizing the way that we need to think critically about what other people's opinions are and what informs those opinions. Is there some bias or prejudice that's informed that opinion, or what is it that's made them say that? Okay, good. With cultural literacy, this is from this is an adult activity. It's from an adult book. It's from Life, the advanced C1 level of Life, and the emphasis here is on cultural literacy, and it's interpreting what we could say, what we could tell about a particular culture from its proverbs. Okay, so here we have the Tuareg people of North Africa, and we've got a list of their proverbs, a list of their sayings. Could you just have a look at the sayings, and then could you tell me what you think these tell you about these people's attitudes and about these people's values? What are the things they value in life, and what are the things they don't really value so much in life? Good. So someone's already said they're nomads, which is absolutely right. Yeah. Good. Humble. That's nice. Yeah. They don't value material things. Absolutely not. They're not a materialistic people. I guess that's partly because they're nomads and they can't carry a lot of stuff with them. Good that they're active. Okay. Fantastic. They're confident. That's interesting. Good. They have a positive outlook. Yeah. Good. Yes, positive, I guess, because it's always possible to reach agreement. That's coming from that thing, that idea of compromising and peacefulness and freedom. Good. Very nice. Okay. So then what you might ask your students is, you might ask them, first of all, if they have any similar proverbs in their own country, or ask them, again, what proverbs do they think, what proverbs are kind of more sayings are most common in their country or culture, and do they reflect somehow a kind of national characteristic or a cultural characteristic? Do they tell you anything about that kind of, about their society in some way? So that would be something that would raise awareness and get them thinking more critically about cultural issues and sort of promote that cultural literacy. Good. Just one more note about this. In the series that we've just published for lower level learners, for sort of primary learners, called Look, we've actually used children from different countries all around the world, and for each unit, when they talk about when the students have studied a particular topic, like travel or clothes, as you can see in the case of this bottom video here, then there are video extracts of kids from different cultures talking about this issue or this topic from their perspective, and that's exactly in this spirit of promoting a kind of cultural literacy. Good. The second thing I was talking about is engaging students more actively with texts. I'd just like you to have a look at this picture. The thing about engaging people with text is really, this engagement should really be at the beginning, before they read. It should be while they read, and of course it should be after they're reading also. What I'd like you to do is just look at the picture, and I'd like you to say, what questions do you immediately ask yourself when you see this picture? Just type as honestly as possible. What are the things that come to mind when you see this guy here doing this, in this place, Niagara Falls? What pictures, what questions immediately come to mind? Good. Someone said, is it really true? It is actually true. It's a true story. Good. Did you work at a circus? Okay. Good. Why would you do that? Fantastic. I think that's a very good question. Is it a fake picture or fake background? Okay. Good. Someone's thinking critically about the image itself. That's great. What's he wearing? Okay. Is it a man or a woman? Okay. Fantastic. Good. The story of this, actually, behind this is the story. It's not of this person who's a performer, tightrope walker from Las Vegas. It's about a famous tightrope walker called Blondin, and a Frenchman who was famous for tightrope walking and most famous for tightrope walking across Niagara Falls. And the two questions I'm going to set are the questions similar to the ones that you've asked. Is why would someone do this? And perhaps what would happen if they fell? It's a question that the kids generally ask when they see this picture. So this is the story, and I'll tell it to you now. It's about Blondin. There are a lot of stories about Blondin. Somebody asked if this is fake. He was a real character, and he did this walk many, many times over Niagara Falls. And each time he did the crossing on a tightrope, people would wait on the other side and watch him, sort of hand him out, almost worried that he was wondering whether he was going to make it across or not. And he always did, and he did various stunts. He would, one time he sat on a chair in the middle. One time he sat down and ate his lunch in the middle. Another time he just stood on one leg in the middle as he was crossing. And one time, the story goes, this is how this story goes, he walked across with a wheelbarrow, a garden wheelbarrow. And he filled it with rocks. So it was quite a heavy wheelbarrow, and he walked across the wire, and the people watched and they waited as he came across, and they gasped and they said, "Ooh." And when he made it to the other side, they clapped and cheered. They went, "That's amazing, that's amazing. You can do anything, Blondin." And Blondin said, "Really? Do you think I could walk back across with the wheelbarrow full of rocks?" And they said, yes, you can do it, you're incredible. You're the greatest tightrope walker in the world. And he said, "Okay, well, actually, these rocks weigh as much as a man. Do you think if I tipped out the rocks and put a man in the wheelbarrow, do you think then I could walk across?" And they went, "Yes, you can do it, you can do it." And he said, "Okay, who'd like to get in the wheelbarrow?" And there was silence. Okay, so the question after the story is, what's the lesson of the story? What lesson did you take from that? What do you think is the kind of moral, if you like, or lesson that we learn from that story? Again, could you type in the box? Yeah, it's easy to talk. Good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's easier to watch something than to do it. Absolutely. Good. Good. People say things they don't mean. Yeah, it's hard to take risks. Yes, don't give up. Good. Good, good. Yes, and someone says, be afraid of your dreams. That's interesting. It's easier to say than do. Yeah. So it's really about belief, in fact. And it's about the people who do this kind of thing. It's the question of why he does it isn't really answered. But the question of where he gets the courage to do that clearly comes from belief, something he had and the people watching didn't have. I think fables are and stories like this are very interesting like this, particularly when teaching children, because people take different lessons from them, and that's something that you can discuss and explore in a critical way. Okay, so that's about engagement with stories. You might be saying to yourself at this point, hang on, what's all this got to do with language teaching? We could see how all those activities kind of support an approach to learning 21st century literacies and an approach to learning in general, keeping a kind of open mind and questioning the thing before you. But how does it help language learning specifically? And just for the last sort of 10-15 minutes, that's what I want to look at. So language learning is not a linear process. I think we all know that. That you teach students certain structures at certain stages of their learning, but you don't just give it to them and then they learn it and that's the end of it. If we looked at an example of a phrase, this phrase, to enjoy doing something, is something we might teach at A2 level. And yet this mistake, I enjoy to play football, could be made by a student at A2, B1, B2, even C1 level. You hear that kind of mistake being made. So learning actually isn't just a question of receiving something passively, it's a question of building your own representation of how the language works, your own understanding of how the language works. And that comes with critical thinking. It's through critical thinking that you build your own representation and a deeper understanding of how the language works. What that means in terms of our teaching classes is that when we're teaching grammar, when we're teaching vocabulary, to some extent when we're teaching pronunciation, that we just need to allow learners greater time for reflection. It's something we hurry, it's a stage of learning that we hurry people through. We don't allow students enough time to ask questions about the language, to reflect on it, to ask what's really going on here. Why can't I say this in this way? It's something we need to do more of, and that's what I'd just like to look at now. Let's take the example of phrasal verbs. Okay, phrasal verbs are something which are taught a lot in English, and very often what we tend to do is we teach a kind of basic comprehension of phrasal verbs, and students then kind of go off and use them incorrectly, and we wonder why they use them incorrectly. And it's because we haven't really given them enough opportunity to notice the limitations really of their use. They very often have a kind of limited scope. So in order to get an essential meaning of a phrasal verb, let's take these three examples: to look up to hang out with, and to take to something. You might give students those verbs in context, and you ask them to match them with a kind of synonym. So look up to comes to mean admire. He's always looked up to his older brother. Hang out with means to spend time with someone. She hangs out with her friends on weekends. Take to is to develop a liking for something. She really took to skiing. If you then leave it at that and then let them go off and sort of practice it, then they're bound to end up using it in an inappropriate, or using some of these words in inappropriate contexts. Much better to give them, or after that, to give them an exercise which asks them to, in a kind of inductive way, to examine for themselves and to work out for themselves what the limitations of use of these words are. So you can say he's always looked up to his older brother, but not I looked up to her decision. You can say she hangs out with her friends on weekends, but you can't say the president is hanging out with other EU leaders this weekend. And by doing that, and then you get this example with take to, which actually works in various contexts. I didn't take to him, she really took to skiing. He's never taken to English in the same way. So this is a kind of inductive approach that asks students to think critically about the language and to process it, therefore process it more deeply. You might be thinking, it's all very well to do that at this kind of level. What about lower level learners? The same thing equally applies to lower level learning. If you take the most basic kind of language, just the language of saying hello and goodbye, you could ensure essential meaning by asking students here to categorize these. Sorry, these words here should have, they should have brackets around them. There should be a bracket around the good of evening and morning and night and afternoon, so that you've got a possibility of saying either good evening or just evening. Okay. So the first thing you do is you get them to identify, in order to ensure essential meaning, to identify which are hellos and which are goodbyes. The second element of essential meaning of these words is to know what time of day you would say each one. So now you match them to times here. Okay. You might also, at a kind of essential level, you might also say which are formal and informal. But really, until the student starts to use them in context, it's not until then that they see really what formal and informal means really in practice and how these are used. I know this because I'm recently learning Spanish, and I had this very question myself about how to use certain greetings. Exactly how formal or informal were they? What was really the appropriate situation to use each one? So you give them pictures like this, like a customer going into a bank with a cashier, and they say, and what would be the appropriate meeting? They're given the time of day, and they say, what's the appropriate greeting? So in this case, again, they're given a time of day here for B, two friends meeting outside the cinema. In fact, they'd probably just say hi to each other. That would be the most natural thing to say. They certainly wouldn't say good evening at that point. Okay, so that's an example of how critical thinking applies even to a much lower level of learner. Thinking critically about texts really means thinking critically about really what's really going on here. What's the author trying to do? Are they successful in this? And if so, how? Or have they failed in that particular aim? And why is that? Why is it that they failed? So this is an article, an example of this. This one is at B2 level. It's an article about Madagascar and about the danger which Madagascar's environment or ecosystems are in because of logging, because of the cutting down of trees, of forests, of hardwood trees particularly. And in this case, students are asked to focus on the language that's used to persuade the reader of the author's argument that this is a terrible thing, really, that's going on here, and we've got to do something to stop it. So, could you just have a look here at this is just a little extract from the text, and what we're looking for is the language that's been used to persuade the reader of the author's point of view. And what the author is doing here is they're using very emotive language. They're using emotionally charged words to try and persuade the reader that this is a terrible thing that's going on. Could you just pick out 3 or 4 words that you think, which you would describe as emotive words. Rob, good, that's fantastic, we've got one there. Good, and a crime, absolutely. Majestic, yes, it's a very, very emotive word because it's saying how wonderful the trees are. Yes, and had stood proudly. Fantastic, okay. So that's very much thinking critically about language and about how language is used to persuade. Good. When it comes to students' output, their production, what we're actually doing is we're turning the focus of that kind of reflection onto students' own production of language, their own discourse. And the hope is that by doing that, by getting them to think about what it is they really want to say, what they think their audience really wants to know about a particular topic, or how their message will best be received by that audience. When they start to think more deeply and try and answer those questions, then the hope is that they produce more authentic output, that they actually get into the subject more, if you like, that they kind of get more involved in it, and as a result they produce more authentic discourse, more thoughtful discourse, and so on. So what they're really doing is kind of setting criteria by which they want that piece of writing or that piece of speaking to be judged. Yes. So let's just have a look at an example here, again from primary materials. And this is, they look first, what students are going to do is they're going to create an interview. And they look first at an interview with a NASA scientist here. And the first thing they're asked to do is, what is it they really want to know? They're given this little snippet about him. They're told that they're given two of the answers to the questions with the interview. Where does he work? He works at NASA. And what does he do? He makes robots. And then students are prompted to ask their own questions. What more do they really want to know about it? They then move from that, from seeing this model, to writing their own interview. And they're asked to go and interview a member of their family about the work they do. It's amazing. I don't know if it's the same way you are. It's amazing, I find here, how little children know or seem to know about what their parents do as jobs. And so that's what they're asked to do. And so they're asked to think, reflect on what they really want to know about what this member of their family actually does in their job, and then to write some questions based on that. And the idea is then that they produce more authentic output as a result. Good. I've kind of come to an end. I've sort of rushed through that a little bit. My summary here, perhaps I could ask you, who do you think said this statement here? That was me. Good. Yes, fantastic. Yeah, because I think that's the biggest kind of takeaway from this, and the most important thing about this is there are two things. One is tapping into their curiosity, just wanting to know more information. And what that really means is getting students to reflect more and get them into the habit of reflecting about ideas, reflecting about the way ideas or the medium through which ideas are presented, and reflecting about the language itself and how the language works. Because it's only when they build that representation, their own representation of the language, they truly come to learn it and they truly come to own it, which is really what we want. That's our sort of object. Does anyone, I've kind of come to an end there. Does anyone have any questions about anything I've said? You could feed them if you like to Emily, and then I'll just have a look, and perhaps she will put them into a form, in my box here, and then I can perhaps try and answer them. A2 was primary, B1 16. No, so somebody's just got a question about levels, whether I was pegging levels to particular ages. I wasn't particularly at all. I think that might have just been an unfortunate accident or coincidence of the examples I chose. I might have chosen adult A2 materials, or perhaps some primary B2 materials. It just happened I didn't do it that way. I wasn't pegging it particularly age to level at all. Any other questions? Our critical thinking book is coming out in March, I think, early in March. Yeah, and it's full of examples and activities. It covers all aspects of language learning, the 4 skills, grammar, vocabulary, and then it's got a whole section at the end on the sort of issues, the kind of issues that you're talking about how we teach critical thinking at lower levels. It's a particular issue people want addressed, and so on. So it's a very practical book, I hope. Good. Any other questions here sometime? Good. Second edition of Life has as far as critical thinking is concerned, the second edition of Life has a much more, what shall I say, a much more sort of structured approach to critical thinking. So the critical thinking syllabus has been more carefully thought through, I would say, and based on our experience of working with critical thinking activities. Yeah, and using a mixture of, particularly with a view to using a mixture of higher and lower order thinking skills within a reading lesson, so that there's a kind of clear progression from one to the other. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. Somebody's asked a question about how do you find the time for critical thinking activities, and I think that's a very, very good question. And I think very often, there's a lot of similarities here between some of this, when we're talking about approach to teaching vocabulary or grammar, for example, a lot of similarities between this and Jim Scrivener's demand high approach to teaching. Insofar as very often what we're doing is we're just asking, critical thinking doesn't have to be in the form of a separate activity, a discrete activity. It could be just a question in one exercise. It could be a question from the teacher that prompts the students to think about why a particular piece of language is being used here or there. So just an incidental question. It doesn't have to take up a lot of time in the lesson. And I mean, the other thing I would say about that is that if it takes 10 minutes for students to, it takes 10 minutes in a lesson for students to reflect on something, ask questions about something, process it more deeply, in order to learn it more effectively. Surely that's better than a whole hour of a lesson without that reflection, where in fact 2 weeks later, they don't really remember the language or understand properly the language they've used. That's the other thing I would say. Good. Okay. I don't know. I think that's probably, yeah, about everything. Thank you very much for listening. It was good to have you all there, and hope to see you again sometime. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're so glad you could take an hour of your time to spend it with National Geographic Learning and Paul Dummett to improve your own teaching practice. So thank you again, first off, to all of you for joining us today. As Paul mentioned, several of the examples he used today were from his 2 different coursebook series, the second edition of Life, as well as Look, which is the new National Geographic Learning series for young learners that will be out in early 2019. Please let us know if you'd like any information about that. I did put the links in the chat box a little bit earlier. And just last but not least, we will be sending you the certificate of attendance along with the recording of the session as well as the slides. You'll get those in the next 5 business days or so just stay tuned for those. And they will also be posted on our website. And the webinar link is right up here. I'm just going to drag the green arrow to show you right there. We do have another webinar next week, and that will be with Dr. Jody Crandall on engaging teenage learners and projects. So we hope you can join us then too. And then we also have the InFocus blog here, and Paul is a frequent contributor along with his co-author for life, John Hughes, on the InFocus blog, and there's definitely a lot of content on critical thinking and personalization there. So I'd recommend you definitely take a look if you haven't already. All right, and last but not least, we do have a survey that I'm going to direct you all to. We'd love to hear your feedback so we can help continue to bring webinars that are useful to your teaching practice. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. If you're not following us already, make sure to connect with us on social media as well, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And all right, I hope everyone has a good rest of their evening, morning, or afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy.